back then you had to live in the South End if you were black. There were a few that didn't live in the South End, but not very many. You know, there's a lot more history that people don't know. And I just want to make sure that we capture all that history, not for me, not for you, but for the great-grandkids and the great-great-grandkids. And so I want to make sure that we have a history of our family and all the black families that lived in the South End, because I don't think anybody else will preserve it if we don't. I think that if we do it the right way, I think that it'll last forever, and that's what I want.
What about this? We had talked earlier about, you know, me making up some questions and sending those to you and kind of preparing for them. I thought we would just, you know, just have a conversation. I'm honored to be able to work with you on it, and I'm really excited about this interview because it gives me an opportunity to get to know you better.
Yep.
And so hopefully, you know, through the process of this interview and this recording, that when we show it to others, they'll understand the importance behind the project. And so that coming from you, I think that's going to be key. The first part, I thought we just have you introduce yourself and just kind of talk about you.
Of course, my name is DeWayne Norris. I'm the first, and I really just want to talk about the way I was raised in the South End. The South End was where I was born and raised. This project is about the South End, and I was raised in the South End in the 1950s and 60s. And to be honest with you, I think that was the peak of the South End. You know, there were over 40 black families that lived in the South End. There were 4 or 5 families that had their own businesses in the South End. My mom had her beauty shop in the house. She actually worked 2 jobs and then went to school at Madam C.J. Walker Beauty College, which is one of probably the top beauty college in the nation. You know, she had the beauty shop there. My uncle built his barbecue restaurant there in Greencastle, and this was all in the 60s. And I actually helped him build that restaurant from the ground up. Then we had other pioneers there in the South End. One gentleman had his own trash hauling business. So the South End was booming. And the thing about it is there was a sense of pride in the South End. I mean, everybody worked. Probably every black that was in school played sports. I mean, it was kind of like automatic. If you went to school, you played sports. And the only ones that really didn't play sports are the ones that couldn't keep their grades up. All my family was in the South End. And I think the most important thing about being raised in the South End is there was a culture there. There was a tradition there. You know, you were expected to do certain things, and the families had a real pride there. And like when on the holidays, the men would get together, they talk about what they want to do, and they might barbecue a hog, or they might just have a big barbecue. The beauty of it is that all the families that weren't living in Greencastle anymore, but were from the South End, they would come back there. During that time, I played a lot of sport. You know, I learned a lot just by playing sports. Coming up, we had athletes there that were outstanding athletes. My brother Stephen, my Uncle Gilbert, they were before me. I think my Uncle Gilbert graduated in the 50s and 58. And he was the first black athlete to receive a Division I scholarship in any sport. And my brother came along and he received a scholarship to Ball State University. He was a state champion in track. And then my cousin came along, he's high school All-American. He received a scholarship to Division I school, University of Iowa. Then I was behind them and played basketball in New Mexico. And it's kind of funny, we all kind of took a different path. Stephen and Gilbert stayed in Indiana. Ray, or what we called in Wheaties, he went a little further away. He went to Iowa. And then when I had to make my decision, I had signed a letter of intent to go to Butler. And they wanted me to play 3 sports because I'd started in 3 sports in high school. And I got to think, I said, I don't want to do that. And plus, I wasn't really crazy about Indianapolis. And then the coach from Eastern New Mexico came, and he came to the house. And I was working, and I got off work, saw that big car there, and you know, I had Eastern New Mexico on, and that was impressive to me. And then he came to the house, he talked to me, and the interesting piece was that I didn't have a clue about New Mexico. And I didn't know how to ask him, do you have any blacks on the team? So I asked him to let me see a picture. So he showed me a picture, and I saw 3 or 4 blacks on the team. And then I told him I'd think about it. I worked at IBM and they had this map where I worked, big map of the United States. I looked on there, saw New Mexico. I saw Indiana was to the left and New Mexico was all the way to the right. And I said, well, if I want to get far away from home, that's where I want to go. I want to go as far away from home as possible. And to be honest with you, DeWayne, I think the Lord told me to do that. I don't think it was just me just thinking that, but after I really thought about it, I think that was just what I was told to do. And luckily I went to a school where we won a national championship my freshman year, got back to the finals 4 and lost by 1 point for getting to the championship. So I had a good start at college, but it really started in Indiana, coming up in Greencastle. And the reason I say that, because I was the only Black on the basketball team my senior year. My junior year, Ray and I were the only Blacks. So I got an education that was different from a lot of the kids I went to school with when I got to New Mexico. I got a great education. And it reflected when I got to New Mexico, because a lot of the guys, I was doing research papers and stuff, and they were using the research papers I used in high school. They had taught me a lot. And so, coming out of Greencastle, it was different. I had some experiences that changed my attitude toward coming out of Greencastle. I never did deal with any real racial stuff in sports. I went to one place. The place where my college coach was from was Martinsville, Indiana. Martinsville, Indiana was the Ku Klux capital of the world at the time. And when I went down there and played in that game down there, that's the only place where I got abused. I was monkeys. The players were pinching me and talking crazy, and I coach called timeout, and he asked me what was wrong. I said, they call me names or pinched. He said, play basketball. We played, and luckily it wasn't a close game, so I got out of there no problem. But that was the only real racial issue I dealt with playing. I remember my sophomore year, we went to a town called Huntington, and we stopped at a restaurant there. And we went in and we went back out. I didn't know why we went in and went back out. And I found out later on that, Ray and I were the only 2 Blacks on the team, and they said they couldn't serve us. That's the only time I really dealt with the racial stuff in high school by playing sports. But I did find out my senior year, I was attempting to date a white girl, which was taboo at the time. And, during that time, it was no big deal. But the thing about it was some of the white boys reacted in a different way. They drove by my house and stuff. Wasn't scared at all. It was just like, it made me mad. And then they confronted me. I had about 3 or 4 of my buddies there. About 5 or 6 white guys came up and confronted us. I think there was 4 of us, but we had no problem with the confrontation. So we moved on. But I learned from that it was okay for me to be a great athlete at Greencastle High School. But when I started, looking at those white girls different, it changed. And it changed me to the point, like that summer, I went down to Bloomington, and I decided, I was going to go to school in Bloomington. I said, okay, they don't want me, it's great for me to play sports. But if I get out of my lane, it's a whole different ball game. So I made up my mind I was going to stay in Bloomington and play sports there. Probably about a week. Football practice was starting that week, and coach managed to track me down. And I told him, I said, well, I don't plan on coming back. I was a starting quarterback the year before, so I don't want to come back. I think the one thing that made me really decide to go ahead and go back there was that Mom kind of said, look, DeWayne, you're a senior. You got 1 more year. You can stick it out. So I decided to go back and go ahead and stick it out my senior year at the high school. Didn't tell anybody about it at all. Probably I told a couple of my friends maybe 10 years ago about it, and they were shocked. These were my friends that I played sports with. Right. Guys I played sports with were special guys, and I'm still friends with them to this day. I learned a lot during that. Going to school in New Mexico, I had only been around Blacks and whites. I never had been around any different race except Blacks and whites. So I get to Eastern New Mexico, there's Hispanics, there's Native American Indians, there's real cowboys. And so it was a culture shock to me, but I liked it because it was different. The beauty of it, I had never been out of Indiana before I went to Eastern, but then I got to travel all over the West. Back, I think we got back to the Midwest maybe twice, Kansas City, of course, for the national championship. So I got to travel. I learned a lot of Eastern as far as, I had to be a man. You go to school, and the funny part was my freshman year, I thought I was doing great. C's, got one D, went on academic probation. Scared me to death. I had to, because I thought, okay, I'm going to be a failure. If I go back home, I'm going to be a failure simply because I flunked out of school. And I'd seen this happen to my uncle and my brother. Stephen and Gilbert both had flunked out and had to come back home. That's all I needed.
Yeah.
I was scared straight from there on. I didn't have any problem with grades. I didn't have any problem with anything. And everything went great my first 2 years at Eastern. National championship my freshman year, Final Four my sophomore year, and then our coach left.
Yeah.
And we get a new coach. And everything changed those last 2 years, from the best 2 years of college sport basketball to probably the worst. The coach that recruited me recruited certain players, like he put a puzzle together. And the other coach, he kind of just got players that were good. A lot of those players weren't as dedicated to what I was used to. One of them was even a drug addict. And then the coach had he'd stack players. He'd get 10 blacks, and we'd have to compete against each other for 2 spots. I even went to the office and told the coach I wanted to quit. And he talked me out of it, of course. Later on in the year, one of the players was sick, and he got on him, one of the black players. And then he came in after practice, and coach kicked him off the team. And I was the captain of the team my junior and senior year. And I said, I'm about done with this. I'm through with basketball. One of the other players, well, if you're through, I'm through. Another player, if you're through, I'm through. So next thing I know, all the black players said they weren't going to play anymore. And then there's a little football player, and he's the president of the Black Student Union or something. He said, well, all the blacks, the football players are boycotting and everything. So it turned out it was a big boycott. It ended up, they took the scholarships, of course, and then we had to go to court, had to go to trial. It was a trial. It lasted about 2 weeks. So we went through the whole process of the trial. Bottom line is we got our scholarships back. I moved on through that, and then and graduated from Eastern, came back to Greencastle. I came back there to do a master's program. I'd already had accepted, and I had a job and everything. And then the head basketball coach, the guy that coached me, he left. Mom says, DeWayne, people are asking me, are you going to apply for that job? Do you think you will? And I said, well, Mom, I'll go ahead and apply. I went ahead and applied, and I'll be dang if I didn't get it. So I was this head track coach, assistant basketball coach, and I was 22 years old. I hadn't prepared to be a teacher. I had prepared just to go to school. So to be honest with you, it was a long year. It was probably the longest year I spent in Greencastle. Ray lived in California, so he came home and asked me if I wanted to move out to California. So I moved out to California with Ray, and out there, I ran some sport recreation programs. Enjoyed that for about the first 10 years, and then moved up to Sacramento. Met my wife down in Southern Cal, and then we moved up here, and we've been up here since I think 1980. During that time, whenever I'd go home, I'd always ask about, any black kids in the South End playing sports. Each year, Mom said, them kids don't want to do nothing. They just want, they just want to hang out and get in trouble. And it just kind of stuck with me because I remember how I was raised, everybody playing sports, a lot of support. So it was a lot of pride. And I saw that pride deteriorating in the South End, and I didn't see as many kids playing sports. So it kind of stuck with me, and I talked to Mom. I said, Mom, I'm thinking about doing something in Greencastle, starting a community center or something. She said, well, if you do that, first thing you want to do is go up and talk to the president of DePaul, because I know for a fact he's trying to find a way to recruit black faculty into Greencastle, but they don't offer anything for the kids that are living in Greencastle. The first thing I decided to do was meet with all the blacks in the South End at the church there. And, I'm telling them what I was thinking about doing, and just really finding out what they thought, because I wanted to focus on the kids and the senior citizens. Overwhelmingly, they said, yeah, that's what we need. I met with the president of DePaul, and he agreed to, he said, well, I'm going to find you a place. I think it's a great idea. We'll support you. And so he was going to move a house that they wanted the vacant lot at DePaul to use as parking. And so the city council wouldn't let him do that. He came back to me and said, I'm going to find your house. And then he contacted me and said, I found you the perfect place. It was a daycare center that DePaul had, and it was right across the street from the Ridge Path School, which is where all of us went to school, the elementary school. And so he said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give this to you for $1. And we started the community center. And I was the director probably for about the first 8 years. And we did great things. We'd have bake sale barbecues, and the seniors would do all the baked goods. And the money that we made from the bake sale barbecues, we'd use for outings for the seniors. Like they'd go out to dinner, or we'd have movie night. And they would dress up, and it was a sense of pride for them. The youth, we focused on things they had never seen or done before. A lot of them said they'd never been to a pro basketball game, so they were able to go to a pro basketball game, a professional football game. We wanted to get all of them experience of college, so we were able to go tour historically black colleges in Atlanta. We focused on supporting families. We had my daughter Tasha. She had a program where they donated hundreds of running shoes. A friend of mine that was born and raised in Greencastle, Bobby Newsom, who also worked for Federal Express out here in California. And he said he could ship them all. So we had what we called the Jogathon. So every family that participated in the Jogathon, they paid $25, but every family member got a pair of tennis shoes. And these were top sale shoes, Asics, New Balance, and that type of stuff. We'd have a Christmas party where every kid would get a Christmas gift. Again, Tasha would get donations from out here where she ran her program, and Bobby would ship them back to Indiana. And then they would contact, like there'd be 4 or 5 families that really had, that really couldn't afford Christmas. So we would meet with them and set them up where we provide the Christmas for all their kids. And then we make sure we'd have events during special times, Thanksgiving, that type of stuff, where we'd have a dinner at the house. So we did all this for 10 years. Everything went great. And then, I saw the seniors are getting old. Mom was getting old. And so I saw, about the last few years, they couldn't really participate. Mom, that was her outlet, was going up to the center. So she couldn't really do that. I worked for Casey Family Programs, and I was able to travel back east and a lot because of my job. And I would stop in Indiana. And we had the jazz festivals every year, and folks would come back, all the Blacks that had lived in Indiana would come back. And I decided, I was wearing down. Mom was old, so I decided to step away. And then, then the pandemic came, and I kept wondering, I kept wondering, who did I play basketball with my sophomore year? So somehow Donna, my wife, was able to get on that computer, and she was able to pull up information. And the first thing I saw my sophomore year is that we had won a conference championship. And the killer was, and I forgot all about this, I had to make 2 free throws with 12 seconds to go as a sophomore to sit the game in overtime. So once I read that, I just got more and more curious. And one of the things I had heard was that during this time that I had set rebound records at Greencastle High School. And I heard that those records had been changed, but I didn't give it much thought. But then when I started doing my research, and I started reading articles about what I had done, and to be honest, DeWayne, I couldn't believe, because I didn't read newspapers when I was in high school. I couldn't believe some of the stuff I had done in high school. Setting records, went to state finals in track, football, all league 2 years. So I decided to investigate this rebound stuff, and sure enough, I got in touch with the athletic director, and sure enough, my records had been changed in 1987. And then also, I found out that they had a Hall of Fame there. But none of the Blacks were in there except my brother Stephen, because he's a state champion. So I contacted the athletic director. Well, you had to be all state in the sport to be into the Hall of Fame. I'm like, I said, well, I was all state football because I played the high school all-star football game. I was state finalist in track, and I was honorable mention in basketball. And I said, Ray was high school All-American in football and Hall State. I said, my uncle Gilbert was high school. He's all state in football, but none of us were in the Hall of Fame. Of course, my word wasn't, I couldn't just tell him that. So I had to research, and I sent him articles. And one of the articles that talked about our team from our senior year, it told about individual players, and just so happened that it said he holds the school record for rebounds of 34, and I set that my junior year. So I sent him that article. Of course, he had to change that. They did a big newspaper article about how 50 years later they had gotten us into the Hall of Fame. I really got thinking, not only if I wouldn't have done this research about the Hall of Fame, none of us would have been in there. And then I got to thinking, we don't have any history in the South End at all. So I started doing research, and I got to thinking, during that time of the pandemic, the center had pretty much closed down. Nothing going on at all. It was pretty much closed down. I decided maybe I could go in another direction. So I looked into starting a South End Black History Museum in the building that had been given to me for $1. And it was really nothing going on, pretty much dead. There were 2 or 3 white members, I guess, had been on the board before it shut down. So I contacted all them, told them my plan. I wanted to start a Black History Museum, a physical, in that center. And I got a lot of pushback, but it wasn't like direct pushback. They kind of put me off. And then one gentleman, I sent him an email. He was the treasurer, and he was in total support of the museum. And then as I moved forward, he went dark. And what I found out had happened was they had recruited another agency, a nonprofit agency, to come into the building. And what they were doing was stalling me until they could get this contract signed with them. So they were able to legally hand the building over to this other nonprofit agency. It was legal. It wasn't ethical. It really broke me down, to be honest with you. One of my friends reached out to me and said, "Hey, we have a cultural and diversity center at DePaul." He said, "Would you be interested in housing the museum at DePaul?" At first, I'm like, I'd rather have it at South End, But then after I thought about it, I said, okay, I'll consider it. And then, so I had a meeting with I think the president of DePaul, the president of the Cultural Diversity Center, and then the vice president. Told them what I wanted to do. They told me they'd get back to me. When they got back to me, they told me, look, we can't house the museum. It's a community, it's a Greencastle museum, and take away from the DePaul students. And it made all the sense in the world to me. But what we can do is we can do this museum online. We can do a digital museum. And he was telling me this, and of course, DeWayne, my electronic skills and all that understanding was zero. So I was kind of like, yeah, okay, let me get back to you. I'll think about it. And the first thing I did was called you. And I told you what they wanted to offer. One of the key pieces to the museum was my Aunt Dorothy had accumulated 60 years of high school yearbooks going back to the 1920s. And the reason she had gotten these, she had started collecting these yearbooks because she had heard that back in the 1920s, all the blacks were in the back, all the seniors were in the back of the yearbook. So sure enough, when she did look it up, she found out that of course they were in the back. She's going to donate 60 years of yearbooks. And that's the key component to the museum. I had created a partnership not only with DePaul, but with the school, the superintendent of schools, and he agreed to, provide 20 years of yearbooks, taking us up to 2,000. So we wanted the museum to go up to 2,000, and then he was going to give us other support. Once I found out that this digital museum, because I remember you telling me, you said, "Dad, this is way better." Better? You said, "Yeah, it'll reach a whole lot more people." I said, you said, if they're going to digitize everything that we provide, the yearbooks, the pictures, the documentation, this is way better because, people can sit at home and look at it. And I thought, thinking, that does make sense. This way they can see, they can go online and see everything. And the reason the museum is just so important to me, DeWayne, because there's a whole lot of culture in that South End that if the museum is not done, it'll be gone and wasted. For example, a lot of people don't know that, I don't know if you've heard the famous scientist Percy Julian. Percy Julian was probably a world-renowned scientist. And he came to Greencastle and went to DePaul when he was 17, but he couldn't go to DePaul because he hadn't taken enough classes that qualified him for DePaul. So he had to take classes at Greencastle High School. Then his parents moved his siblings. He had 5 siblings that they all had to live in the South End, because back then you had to live in the South End if you were Black. There were a few that didn't live in the South End, but not very many. And so all 5 of his siblings graduated from Greencastle High School and went to DePaul University. So, you know, there's a lot more history that people don't know. And I just want to make sure that we capture all that history, not for me, not for you, but for the great grandkids and the great great grandkids. And so I want to make sure that we have a history of our family and all the Black families that lived in the South End, because I don't think anybody else will preserve it if we don't. And that's why this museum is so important to me. I think that if we do it the right way, I think that it'll last forever, and that's what I want. I want to be able to know that I left something for my family to know about their history and be proud of. And I think the best part of this project is that I'm working on it with you. And so this is the first time where we're really, really just communicating on a constant basis. We've always stayed in touch, but this is something where you're learning about me and you're learning about the family, and you're really learning about the history of the South End. This thing is going to be big. That's the one thing that DePaul agreed to, is that I told them I wanted to be top notch, and I think that they will do everything they can to make it top notch.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the way I feel about it. I think I don't know if I talk too much or not, DeWayne. You had any questions, but I got on a roll. I can't lie.
I mean, there's a lot that you said, and there's a lot of things that we can go back and put it into proper context, so that people can digest it in a way that's meaningful for them.